Hey everybody, welcome back to the Brownie Points podcast. I'm your host Noam with my co-host
Levi.
Great job. To kick it right off, our first segment is going to be Deshaun Watson. Who's to blame for that mess of an offense that we saw? The coach, is it the O-line? Is it more Deshaun Watson? And they'll kind of naturally lead us into the conversation of, at what point do you say it doesn't matter how much money we've put in, how many draft picks we've traded? At what point is the Browns better off with a non-Deshaun Watson named quarterback? Then we're going to do our Brownie Points segment where we award Brownie Points to the standout players on offense, to the standout players on defense. And then we're going to have our look ahead segment where we'll cover the Browns' upcoming matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. So getting us started off right away, who's to blame for that offense? Because that was obviously a mess. Who's to blame?
So actually, I'm first going to start off by putting to rest something that I think was used a lot last year that very clearly at this point is a group that's the least to blame, which is the receivers. Do not blame the receivers. Now, Cooper did have that one drop. I know people are posting all over the end of the game. But generally speaking, hey, played just fine. I won't lie. Well, it wasn't always perfect. Njoku dropped a ball or two. Wasn't perfect. But generally speaking, there was talent, and it was clear, and they broke open several times and made some plays. And I just want to put that aside just because sometimes that is used as a scapegoat. And sometimes it's fair and sometimes it's not. In this case, let's just make it clear. I think we really have receiving talent here, especially this year with Jerry Jeudy coming along and all that.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, moving forward, I think it's pretty fair to say, to me, it's Deshaun Watson. I will also say coaching wasn't perfect, and it again leads to the most confusing part, which I think, and we're not going to get into the full debate, but in the debate of moving on from Baker to Deshaun, that whole debate that happens, you often hear people only talk about that, but not often talk about, okay, let's say you were moving on from Baker. Should you have moved on to Deshaun? Like, as a separate question.
Yeah. I mean, that comes up all the time, right? If you're going to replace somebody, you got to have somebody better who you're replacing them with. Otherwise, why did you replace them?
But what nobody discusses is, okay, maybe you want to move on, but did you have to move on in this direction? If you didn't have anyone, maybe you should have gotten a middling guy just to hang around for a year, like Brissett, that you got anyway.
Brought him back in, yeah.
And just let him be, well, you know, they
kept
got,
him, yeah.
Just have him be the starter and not pledge all that money to somebody that didn't make sense. And the reason why I'm bringing that in is because I think coaching's making a lot of efforts, and yet I think they are in different worlds. What Deshaun wants to do and what the coaches want to do are so different that, yes, coaches should tailor their offense to an extent to their talent, definitely, but also you're asking him to do something so completely alien, it makes no sense. He was there, you knew you were keeping him. Why bring in someone who's so astronomically different in what he brings to the table and what your coach wants to do? It's one thing to tailor the offense. It's another thing to come up with a whole new offense. So right off the bat, that does have to be mentioned. Mm-hmm. On another level, I thought coaching did a great job with protection. Offensive line, yeah, it wasn't great, but we knew that. There was injuries. They weren't going to be great, but they schemed things up so that there actually a lot of times was enough time to make plays. You're not always going to get 6 seconds. If you're getting 3-4 seconds, it's relatively clean.
In the NFL, you've got to make that play.
Especially when you know your offensive line isn't up to par. You know, they're injured. They're going to come in there. If you're schemed up that kind of time, coach is doing his job.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, what I would like to see is still more of a shift to a dink and dunk offense, 10 to 20 yards a lot more. More run, which there definitely needed to be more running. Well, things weren't going well, but I'd like to see Pierre Strong up the middle a couple times. He's your muscle. Throw him up the middle. Bring that in for you. And then, yeah, you're going to have to allow to those quick plays. You did see the most success they had was 10 yards. Not even looking, not even thinking. It's a couple seconds, 10-yard out, something like that. Occasionally go for the 20. It may not be as effective as what Stefanski wants to accomplish, but it's probably the most effective offense that you can get away with.
Yeah, because when he threw the ball beyond 20 yards, it wasn't even close. You wouldn't even know he was throwing to half the time when he threw beyond 20 yards. He just absolutely was sailing that ball. It was nowhere near anybody. It was a disaster. It was meaningless. I think they probably took those throws a couple times because sometimes you got to do something just for the sake of making the defense play honest, so the defense knows that that's a possibility. I don't think that even accomplished that. It was so inaccurate. It was just...
Well, there's that, but also I still think there was too many plays that required too much thinking. And it's sad.
And he doesn't think well.
He doesn't process.
Yeah. And in many areas of life, he doesn't seem to think that well.
That's
right?
a different story, right?
Yeah.
But we'll get to that next
Yeah, we're going to cover the new news that just dropped. We dropped like an hour before we started shooting or something like that, so it was good, got in just in time. Well, we will cover that, but we're going to get into it later.
But yeah, he doesn't process well. It's very clear that he doesn't process well. So you do need those quicker plays, not just because of the depth, but also because the more long developing plays typically require you to go through more reads.
Yes.
And you have to do more thinking, right? So like you have to look at someone and anticipate when they're going to be open, and also anticipate the safety. Mm-hmm. Is the safety going to have enough room? How is it going to play out with the corner and the safety coming in? Will there be enough time when the safety comes? Will it take the head off my receiver? There's just more that goes on, and that kind of causes him to freeze up. And you'll even see it with throwaways. He'll freeze up and get sacked when there's plenty of time for a throwaway.
Yeah.
He just seems to freeze up a lot. So try to take as much thinking off the table. It's kind of what you typically talk about with rookies, which is a bad sign and speaks to probably wanting to move on from him. But for this year, take advantage of what you got to the best extent you can. You only get the hand you get, and this is your hand.
Yeah.
So on one hand, I do want to say coaching, I think, does have room to grow. But overall, you can't totally blame them because Deshaun doesn't know what he's doing out there.
Yeah, I agree. I put it wholeheartedly on Deshaun Watson. Obviously, yes. Like, as a side note, the coaching could have probably been a little bit better for that. But that's 100% on Deshaun Watson in my mind. He was just, he's not playing like an NFL quarterback. He's not making reads. Like, I was noting this like while we were watching the game. I was like, watch his head. His head doesn't move. Barely. Like, obviously some plays it does. For the most part, he's barely moving. He's not reading the defense. When we play against other teams, right, with the Browns are on defense, when the quarterback hasn't released the ball 3-4 seconds and you start getting to that 5 mark, 6 second mark, 7 second mark, you start getting that dreaded feeling in your stomach like, oh my God, they're about to make a huge play. This is too much time. Why are we getting that same feeling when our quarterback has the ball that long? It's supposed to be a good thing. Instead, with Deshaun Watson, almost a negative because he doesn't seem to process football that well. The more time he has to think, to read the defense, to try and anticipate where windows are supposed to be, the worse it seems to get. And that's obviously a huge issue. And it's one of those stark contrasts between him and Joe Flacco. We talked about it when they went to Joe Flacco and we were watching those games. We talked about that difference. And now we're seeing it again. It's like now we went backwards. Again, we have another quarterback, again, who's not anticipating windows. The more time he has, the worse it gets. The most successful Deshaun Watson plays in that game were the plays where he got rid of the ball in under 2 seconds. Once he got past 2 seconds, the likelihood of him being successful just dropped off a cliff. That's a huge issue. That's Deshaun Watson's fault. And when you watch the replays, you'll see there's guys open, and Deshaun Watson simply isn't seeing them. And he's locking on to receivers and trying to force it to them. It seems very predetermined. He knows where he thinks he wants the ball to go. He locks onto them, and he's going to make that throw one way or another. And if he doesn't, he typically bails and tries to run and ends up going straight into the arms of the defensive lineman, which we saw a number of times. I've seen some plays where he has the ball, and he's got good protection. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. Protection's still good. It's not even breaking. And he tucks his head and starts running right into the defense, and the whole play blows up. He just leaves the pocket. Why is he doing that? I don't know. But it's Deshaun Watson. From every way I try to look at it and all the different aspects of playing quarterback, Deshaun Watson's not doing that. He simply didn't play like an NFL quarterback. Now, to his credit, well, not really to his credit, but for our comfort's sake, I suppose, during our look-ahead segment next week, I said, look, Deshaun Watson's not going to be that great. Like, I predicted the Browns to win because I thought Deshaun Watson was going to show flashes of what he can do. But overall, I said, look, he's going to be rusty. It's going to be bad. And we definitely saw that. It's very possible that as he has more time and more reps, his decision-making will speed up, and that would help things a little bit. But I'm skeptical. We'll see. And the real question is, if he doesn't improve this, where do we go, right? Which kind of leads us into our next segment. At what point does Andrew Berry look at this team and say, I guess Jimmy Haslam too, right, because he's pretty involved, do you say sunken cost fallacy? It doesn't matter how much money we've invested. It doesn't matter what assets we traded away for him. This team will be better off without Deshaun Watson playing quarterback, and we move on to Jameis, or maybe they make a trade for somebody. You never know what will become available. At what point do you make that trade? I ran a Twitter poll on this. Most fans seem to feel either they want to make the trade now, which I'm going to say is probably more of an emotional response, but most fans were in that 3 to 6 game range, which I agree with, somewhere between 3 and 6 games. If it continues like this, so without improvement, is when I would move on. Because we've already had 12, 13 games now of data, and it's been horrific. Let's see where we can go. And not every game was terrible, but for the most part, it has been bad. He had one great half against Baltimore.
And
all
even
of his time
then,
here.
if you watch that half, he wasn't asked to do that much. It was a lot of his athleticism that did the heavy lifting. And he did have some decent throws, but it wasn't like he was sitting there just suddenly he was, processing and making anticipatory throws. It still wasn't that. It was a good half, but
yeah.
Let's not.
But that can only carry you so far, yeah. And
Yeah.
and I know people like to say, "Oh, the Browns were 5-1 with him last year," and that's true. But if we watched the games. We're Browns fans.
was despite
we watched it. Yeah, often it was despite him. He had good moments. He had decent games. It really wasn't like all terrible, but he wasn't great. Wasn't.
Besides the Ravens game, despite him.
Yeah,
Ravens game.
You didn't watch those games and say we won because of Deshaun Watson. He was usually either bridge quarterback play or bad.
Yeah.
So this year, when do we finally move off him for good?
So there's two parts to moving on, right? So 3 to 6 is a discussion about when you, and I would say probably closer to 6, 5 to 6 games is probably when you're looking at whether or not you would be willing to bench him. But the second part is actually moving on from him. Now, meaning off the roster.
Yes.
So if you're looking,
Well, I just meant not starting, but
right, because if you're getting off the roster, that's more complicated.
very complicated. With that contract,
So
nobody's
number
going to be
one-
able to trade for him.
Nobody's trading for him. It's not happening. At least not until the end of the year, which I'm going to get to in a second.
Yeah.
You might get your opportunity, though, to get someone you want. If something comes up and somebody comes available that you didn't think, or whatever it is, and somebody's trying to make a play, and there's a player they want, and they get rid of someone, like, let's say, for example, just an example, because I like him, I'm going to throw it out there. I like Sam Howell, for example. Let's say they decide they like Sam Howell. I think he's a good fit for Stefanski's offense. But let's just say. And the Seahawks are doing very well, actually. And they're actually missing, I don't know, a corner. And they really like Newsome. You're thinking you're going to move on. He's willing to sign a deal with the Seahawks. Maybe you make a deal and you get Sam Howell coming back, and you think it's a good opportunity to get someone that you really like.
Yeah.
Then maybe something happens early. But most likely, I think it will go to the end of the season. I think they will restructure the contract, put it into a signing bonus, probably give him a couple extra million to do it, so they can dump him next year. And that's probably what I think will happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't see him playing well enough throughout the year. As far as when considering benching him, I think they will go a while, because you do have to remember Andrew Barry and Kevin Stefanski do tend to be very systematic in their approach and not quick on to judge and do things.
Yeah. Which
Even if in
overall-
his head he's thinking moving on,
Yeah.
I still think would wait.
And I
So-
think that has its downsides, but overall I do think that's a positive. I think the Browns needed stability. And even though they might be a little slow to react, I think overall the team needed that.
Yeah, and the thing is that even if at 6 games he makes a decision in his head, he probably still wouldn't do it till 8 or 9 or the bye or something like that, like 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Something,
Or
something
maybe
like
even
that.
once they've already been eliminated from the playoffs.
It might be that long.
If
because of the
if
way
we get
they
to that
are.
point, if he plays like this, we will be at that point by game 9.
Yeah, and I think they'll. Yeah, I agree. And I think it would be a move on next year. The more interesting thing is at that point, do you start Jameis or DTR? My guess is Jameis because they probably had discussions with him, considering he did have some options.
It's got to be Jameis. It's got to be.
You've got to think they probably talked to him and were like, "Hey, if there's a chance, we'll let you play."
Yeah.
If they didn't have that conversation, I think it depends if you're still in the playoff conversation. If you're not, you might go to DTR
Yeah.
and see what you have a little bit. You know, it's year 2. He might have improved, but probably Jameis. The question becomes, if you're week 7 and you're like 3-3, you got a shot. He's played terribly. Your defense has basically gotten you 2 of your wins, you know?
Yep.
That's when you think, hey, we still have a shot at the playoffs. But Deshaun needs to go. You might finally see that move. And they might be aided along by this new allegation.
Yeah.
Which basically, we don't know much yet, but new allegation came down. Civil filing. Interesting timing, which either comes down to wanting to cause maximum pain, which is either because they just general malice, which could be understandable if the allegations are true,
Yeah.
or
Because it's a different kind of
or bigger settlement.
It's a different kind of accusation. Because the previous 22, right, were all from massage therapists, all from the same world, the same type of a thing.
Yeah.
This one was alleging about a date, like a
Yeah,
completely
different story.
separate kind of issue.
Yes.
Well, similar kind of issue, but in a different scenario. It's not going to be grouped in with that. So there could be
Correct,
an
yeah.
additional suspension. The NFL would consider this like a new offense and not part of what happened before.
And so, yeah, if he was, and that's the other reason why they would wait too, is if something does happen with that, he has a morality clause, and then he's gone.
The thing is that with the way court cases go, we're probably not going to have any kind of finality from it before next year.
Yeah.
Or sorry, by next year. By the end of this
Yeah.
year. Sorry, by
That's
the end
what
of
I
this
mean.
year. It's
Yeah.
going to be a little bit. We're not going to know about at week 8 what's happening with this, I don't think.
Right. And so that's what I mean. Like, they're not going to jump for the roster for as long as possible until they have an answer on that, because obviously if the morality clause lets them go, they're happy.
Yeah.
They move on.
And I think that's something for
So-
next year. But I think for this year, I don't think it'll
For
have
this year,
an
no, it's
impact.
not.
I think it's,
No.
Exactly. And the thing is that, like,
I do want to mention one thing on Deshaun Watson's
Yeah.
behalf. His father did die.
Yeah.
about a week beforehand. To be fair, that kind of emotional impact can completely wreck you.
Yeah.
So he's had a long history of playing, semi-long, but with Cleveland over multiple seasons. But to be fair, it might have been worse than it should have been because of that high emotional impact. So I do want to mention that, just to be fair.
Yeah. And another thing, it is week 1. Weird stuff happens in week 1 sometimes in the NFL. It wouldn't be the first time we've seen a team look one way in week 1 and look completely different for the entire rest of the season. True. So it's important to note that some reservations, but at the end of the day, what happened, and we have to talk about it, right? I think that part of the thing that makes this very different, I think, than what happened last year, because Deshaun Watson wasn't that great last year either, right? What we have behind him is a known quantity. Before last year, what we had behind Deshaun was unknown.
Well, PJ Walker's a relative known.
Well, sorry, he's kind of a known, but it's not. It's not. It's not production.
It's not all complimentary.
Exactly. It wasn't like a real option. That's a known real option, is what I mean. Jameis Winston is a known option. That Jameis Winston can play better than what we saw Deshaun Watson do. We know for a fact that Jameis would have been a better quarterback for this past game. That's kind of a fact. Will he be better in Game 5? We don't know, and that's why Deshaun Watson is the quarterback still. But that is a different situation. There is a much more viable known quantity behind him than he had in the past. Joe Flacco obviously ended up being a whole other thing, but they didn't know about him. They got him off the bench, and that was an out-of-nowhere thing. So I think that's all worth noting. Like you said, we're pretty much in agreement here. I think somewhere in that 5 to 6 game range, if he plays like this, is where they probably should move off him. Will they? I agree. They'll probably be very, very hesitant to do that. I would be pretty surprised if they actually do make that decision before week 10, even though they probably should at week 6 if he's playing like this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. They just move slowly, but yeah, I think they should. But yeah, again, I would say closer to midseason before they make any decisions. Hopefully Deshaun picks up though. Hopefully,
yeah.
Even if he is bad, hopefully he's not as horrific as this past week.
Yeah, because if he plays like a bridge quarterback, the team can make the playoffs. So let's go ahead to our Brownie Points segment. For those of you, if you're a new listener, the Brownie Points segment, I covered it briefly at the beginning, but the Brownie Points segment is where we award 3 Brownie Points, 2 Brownie Points, and 1 Brownie Points to the standout players on offense, to the standout players on defense. The more Brownie Points you get, the better we thought you performed. Obviously, from that game, there's not much to talk about. I only have 1 to give out on offense, 1 to give out on defense. I think you only had 1 for both sides, I think. Mm-hmm. For myself, this is going to be a quick segment. It was a disaster. We're not going to spend too much time on it. But on defense, I do want to give 2 Brownie Points to Myles Garrett. Maybe he even deserved 3, but I'm going to give him 2 because of just how the game went overall. Myles Garrett consistently beat his guy at the line of scrimmage. I was watching him a lot throughout that game. There wasn't much else to look at. So I ended up spending a lot of time actually focusing in on Myles Garrett. He did a great job beating his man with consistency, which is obviously something he does. That's why he's considered the best defensive end in the league, if not top 3, according to everybody at least. So I thought he did play well. On offense, I'm going to give 1 Brownie Point to Wyatt Teller. A lot of people were saying that the offensive line was a big problem in that game. I actually disagree. The offensive line wasn't incredible, but the offensive line was not a disaster. Deshaun Watson was a disaster. Many of those plays that led to sacks were Deshaun Watson's fault. He held on to the ball too long, didn't throw it away when he should have. With other quarterbacks, it would not have looked that bad. Now, the other offensive linemen weren't great, but Wyatt Teller actually, I thought, did play a solid game, and I feel like he deserves a little bit of a shout-out for that. Who are your Brownie Points?
So I do want to mention your point about the sacks. Yeah, like fans, the moment they see sacks, the moment they see pressure, even after 5 seconds, a lot of times people will jump to, offensive line.
Yeah.
Not really fair.
Some sacks are the quarterback's fault.
Some sacks are, yeah.
And Deshaun Watson is one of those guys.
But I didn't want to give offense or defense. I just watched. I didn't like it. Personally, I didn't feel like there were any
I didn't like it either.
Any special performances that made me jump out, but you do tend to pay more attention to some of those individual defensive players than I do, I'll be honest. I'm a little more offensively driven, for sure. There were some guys who made some plays, and it was nice. There was a couple sacks. Miles did show up. Devlin Tomlinson did get a sack. Za'Darius got a sack. Yeah. It wasn't like the defense was terrible, but overall it was a little hard to watch.
Yeah, because we talked about like a number of those plays we felt like was a little unfair for the defense because they were out on the field for so long. There comes a point where no matter how talented you are, you don't have the energy to make stops. Drive after drive after drive when your offense is getting 3 and outs.
I will say, I don't think they were still up to the level they were last year.
No, I completely agree. Which is
not bad.
I just think it wasn't quite as bad as the scoreline looked. Yes. Because they were constantly in situations where they've been on the field for so long already at this point.
But it is, to me, a little bit of a nervous point because we might need them to be so dominant.
No, they do need to be.
Like, that's the scary part.
Yes.
It's not that it's their fault so much as it might not be hitting a level we need, which is unfortunately we need it. But,
yes.
But that's a story for a different day. Ultimately, again, week 1, all that. So I'm going to give one, though, to Jalen Darden, the return man. I thought he had several great returns. It was also, I think, the single best day for a return man for the Browns in like 5 years. I mean, just because we haven't had a good, like, that guy was doing a good job returning the ball.
Didn't we have one guy return a punt for a touchdown?
When?
Was it DPJ? I thought so. Whatever, we'll move on. But I thought there was somebody in the Browns in the last couple of years who returned one for a touchdown. But whatever, either way.
Long time.
The special teams has been...
it was all day. He had several nice returns
Yeah.
on top of having the big one. So
either way, the return game has been horrible for the Browns for a long time.
And he actually had a really nice day, and he was consistent. He consistently had good returns. He made no boneheaded moves, and he always got back some solid yardage. He was consistently getting him to at least the 30-plus. He was never putting him in a bad spot. I've seen with this dynamic return, a lot of guys end up under the 20. Like, it didn't happen to him. So I thought he did a good job, and he really put forth that effort. And as the one phase that felt good, I wanted to give him some credit. So he gets 1 brownie point. The defense, again, hopefully, they can get back a little into form. So, again, they don't look bad, but the bigger question is, how are they going to look on the road? Because if they're looking like they did, this past week, but on the road, and it's like, okay, well, that's an improvement on the road.
Yeah, exactly.
So
we'll see what happens.
Things in time, right?
All right, so thank you for actually setting me up for a nice little segue there. Let's cover our look-ahead segment. Browns versus Jags coming up this week. What do you think is going to happen? Are we going to see improvements? And what is the impact or lack of impact of Kadarius Toney, the addition that the Browns made today?
Yeah, so Kadarius Toney, to me, is actually very worrying. Not so much him exactly, because I don't think he'll play, or at least very much.
Yeah,
you barely even see Cedric Tillman out there, and he's a lot better. What is more concerning to me is the logic I feel coming from the front office. You had David Bell, at least he catches balls. Kadarius Toney drops balls. It's not like you're missing talent that you're willing to take a risk on a guy who's probably worse but has a ceiling that's better. You have the talent. So I just don't understand the logic of that move. And for that reason, it is a little concerning to me. Like, I don't always expect you to make the biggest move, but I want to feel like, okay, I understand why you did that. David Bell isn't making money, and there is no obvious advantage to me. So that's why, for me, it's a little concerning.
Yeah, because it's not like there was an injury, and it's like, all right, we need to add a receiver.
Right.
And then Bell wasn't available anymore or something, so you got and you signed Kadarius Toney. Kadarius Toney, obviously, I think, does have more upside, but at least at this moment, just because of David Bell.
But he's been tried for so long. And he was tried with the Chiefs. You don't think he's in a bad situation. He had a chance to play real playing time with the Chiefs and looked awful.
Yeah.
Not his first year, not his second year, not his third year, So at a certain point, who are you fooling? I'd rather at least have a guy who catches the ball.
That's what makes it an odd move. It feels like a very... What was that even for?
Darts at a
Is that supposed to improve our receiver room? No. Did we have an injury? No. So why did you pick him up? I don't know. Regardless, what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is happening this game?
I'm definitely nervous. On the road.
Yeah.
Jags actually did look pretty good against the Dolphins. They did struggle late. They ended up losing. But they overall look pretty good. They did make some mistakes, so the question will be, do they continue to be mistake-driven and have those turnovers that were stupid and like fumbles that were just kind of mind, mistakes, just those kind of crazy mistakes that just drive you nuts, those brain farts. But also if they don't, then they probably win that game, and that's a lot better than what the Browns look. So they look pretty good for the most part in that game. I will say that Trevor Lawrence didn't look spectacular. I mean, most quarterbacks didn't look good this week, but he put up about 170 yards. However, competent. They've got Kirk. They've got Thomas Jr., who had a pretty nice week 1. They've got some talent. We do have a good secondary, but they do have some talent to that can hurt you. They do have, they've got ETN, who's a pretty good running back. They've got talent, and their defense actually really slowed down the Dolphins for a while there, which is really concerning because we did not look great on offense, and it feels like, their defense is actually pretty good. And then on top of that, our defense is going on the road. So it's a test. This isn't the number 1 offense, but it is a pretty good offense, and we are on the road. It doesn't feel great. We'll have to see. I got to be honest, I'm not feeling good. I hate to say it, and maybe it's too much week 1 blues, but right now I think that the Jaguars are going to win, and I think it's going to be probably 24-10.
Wow.
I think they're going to slowly. I don't think they're going to beat up on the defense. I just think they're going to get a lot of opportunities, and they're going to start to just put up a few points.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our offense is just going to struggle mightily. And it's unfortunate, but until I see a reason to think they can turn around, at least give me Chubb, I just have no reason to think they can really put up points.
Yeah, because coming into this year, we didn't know what the baseline is for Deshaun Watson. We said we know he's going to be rusty, and we just hope that he improves every game. But we didn't really know what that baseline is. The baseline is the floor, right? There's even like room to draw a line. It's literally the floor. It's about as low as it could possibly be. So coming from there, even if he improves, we're talking about getting from you don't even belong in the NFL to you're a bubble guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What's the next step? Okay, now you're going to play like a third string backup from the floor. Do you know what I'm saying? Even if he shows significant improvement and jumps like 2 or 3 levels, that's still just backup quarterback play because of how low he was in game 1. Knowing that we don't have Nick Chubb to come in and, save a few plays here and there, get you a touchdown or a breakaway for a big play, my gut tells me the Browns are going to lose this game. I think the defense is going to play a little better, even though it's on the road. I'm going to cop out a little bit. If the Browns win, it will be 13-10. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the kind of game I think. If they win, I think that's what it would look like. 13-10, 14-10, something like that.
Probably require a pick 6.
I feel like the Browns are probably going to lose this game, though. Not 24-10, but I will say 24 as well to 13.
Close.
So a little bit different, but yeah, 23-13, maybe 23-17. The Browns don't kick as many field goals because they kind of like to go for it. So, that's a separate discussion, but
yeah.
I keep going back and forth because the Browns fan in me wants to say that I think they're going to win and have that hope, but the analyst, quote unquote, in me feels like they're going to lose.
And I do want to throw out there one quick also point. Their offensive line is injured and having issues, and bad offensive lines do not travel, meaning a lot of times they have a lot of trouble on the road with all the noise.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if there's noise in Jacksonville, but
well, there's some though. That's true. It is Jacksonville.
People get pretty loud in their pool there, but
yeah, that's true. That will help.
Jacksonville's horrible.
But they can have some trouble. On the road.
If they're in London, maybe it'd be a different story. But
that's true.
I feel like they're better supported in London than they are in Jacksonville. Whatever. We're not here to dog on Jacksonville, but
that's fair. One thing, Deshaun, he has a goal this week. Play better than Malik Willis. Willis is playing for the Packers. It's a low bar, but it's something you can achieve.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's your goal.
Yeah. So I think that's going to wrap up our episode for the day. Thank you for sticking with us. Hopefully we were able to be somewhat therapeutic for you. Did you have one last thing?
Oh, and I just want to add that I'll be putting out episode 2 of Levi's Locks. We made money this past week, and we look to make some more money, so we'll hopefully get that out to you by Thursday, hopefully.
Yeah, and again, those are not part of the podcast. Those are uploaded separately to YouTube. They will come out before Sunday, and yes, it was profitable this most recent time.
It was, 20%.
20%? Excellent. Love to hear it. Again, if you're interested in that will come to our YouTube channel, so go ahead and subscribe to us there. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.